بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. Assalamu alaikum, dear brothers and sisters. I would like to start my lecture with congratulating all my dear brothers and sisters for the auspicious occasions of the birth anniversary of Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam, Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam, and Abbas ibn Ali alayhi salam. My talk is about an important topic about Islamic spirituality. But the lens that I'm going to discuss the subject through is the lens of practical spirituality as exemplified in the lives of our role models, the Prophet, peace be upon him, and Ahlul Bayt. And it's also relevant to these auspicious occasions that we have, in the sense that these three people, Imam al-Sajjad, Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam, and Abbas ibn Ali, these are among the prime role models that this discussion is about them. Let me start my talk with introduction. When we are talking about understanding religion, understanding faith, the prevalent perspective that we have nowadays of religion is to some extent shaped by the Protestant study of religion, as the Protestants were the ones who started the field of academic study of religion in the 16th and 17th century in Europe. So especially in the West, the idea of religion is primarily, this has been the case for a long time, that it was shaped by the Protestant study of religion, the perspective of religion. And for Protestants, the main characteristic that defines religion is faith, sola fide, their motto, along other important points like sola scriptura. The sola fide, faith alone, talks about this concept that religion is defined by faith. Although practice is important as well, however, practice is just a sign. It is the belief that defines religion. So the focus on belief and the theoretical perspective of religion became the main tenet in studying religions since 16th century. However, in contemporary scholarship on religion, a more emphasis has been put on the function of religion, its practical impact, religious experience. So that's how the field is changing in the contemporary era. So in response, in criticism of how it is established by Protestant scholarship, nowadays the focus is going to be somehow is being shifted towards the function of religion, the practical impacts, the lived religion, how religion is experienced by the people who practice it, by its devotees, by its adherents, and the role that religion plays in one's life. So right now, we see a kind of shift towards practice, But the shift means that for the ones who are advocating for this shift, they are not anymore much concerned about beliefs. For them, it's the lived religion that matters. It's the practice that matters. It's the ritual that matters. In contrast to the Protestant approach to understanding religion, their perception of religion, which revolves around faith and belief. You see, for example, in Judaism, the focus is more on practice and good deeds, to the extent that faith is just somehow left to the margin, dismissed. That's why you hear about some people calling themselves secular Jews. You don't have in Islam secular Muslim. You either are Muslim believing in God or not. You can't be an atheist and be a Muslim. You can't be an atheist and be a Christian. But it's possible to have secular Jews, the ones who don't believe in anything, but they acknowledge, recognize themselves as Jews. And one of the reasons is that in Jewish religious thought, it is not the faith that is the main criterion. Rather, it's the action. The concept of mitzvah in Judaism puts emphasis on acts of the people. So it says, for example, if someone who is secular doesn't believe in God, but his actions go in line with the Jewish law, his actions are being considered according to Jewish law as good deeds, this guy would be rewarded, even if he doesn't believe. Because it's the mitzvah that matters. It's the action that matters. It's just, what I'm saying is just a kind of, I know that when we're talking about Christianity or Judaism's perspective of religion in just a few minutes, it's just grossly covering. It's not, for sure, it's not an accurate presentation of how they see it, but just an overall, just a touching, just to say what the focus for them is. For the Protestant who study religion, the focus is the belief. For a Jew in understanding religion, the focus is the action. In Islamic perspective, however, neither faith nor good deed alone can lead to one's salvation. They both are essential. They must be together. And it is crystal clear from the verses of Quran, numerous verses of Quran, that emphasizes that these two go hand in hand. It's chapter Baqarah, for example, verse 25. وبشر الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات أن لهم جنات تجري من تحتها الأنهار. The ones who بشر الذين آمنوا, the ones who believe, وعملوا الصالحات, the ones who practice good deeds. Same chapter Baqarah, verse 82. والذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات أولئك أصحاب الجنة هم فيها خالدون. Verse 277. إن الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وأقاموا الصلاة وآتوا الزكاة لهم أجرهم عند ربهم. Chapter Al-Imran, verse 57. وأما الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات فيوفيهم أجورهم. Chapter Nisa, verse 57. والذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات سندخلهم جنات تجري من تحتها الأنهار. So on and so forth. Many examples in the verses of Quran, just to solidify, just to leave no doubt that from Islamic perspective, faith alone or action alone does not help. They need to be together. Someone who believes but doesn't act, or someone who doesn't believe and act but not for the sake of Allah, not according to your right understanding, proper understanding. It is not what Islam considers as a path of salvation. So, from Islamic perspective, the prophetic mission was not just to teach people about belief that there is a creator whom they must worship and obey, but it was about showing people what does belief means in terms of practices and moral expectation in the day-to-day life. So it's not just certain teaching I learn, I memorize them. These are teachings I'm expected to apply in my life. It's a matter of practice that matters. I must learn, matter of belief. I must have faith. But then that's not the end. That's just the beginning. Then this knowledge and this belief must be reflected, manifested in my life. And it is again can be seen in the way that Quran, the divine word, talks about the prophetic mission, the missions of the prophets. It's chapter Baqarah, verse 129. رَبَّنَا وَبَعَثْ فِيهِمْ رَسُولًا مِّنْهُمْ. It's the words of the Prophet Ibrahim after building Kaaba. And he asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to send messengers to guide people. وَبَعَثْ فِيهِمْ رَسُولًا مِّنْهُمْ يَتْلُو عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتِكَ وَيُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةَ وَيُزَكِّيهِمْ إِنَّكَ أَنْتَ الْعَزِيزُ الْحَكِيمُ. O my Lord, our Lord, send among these people messengers to recite for them your signs, your commandments, your instructions. Teach them the book, teach them these beliefs, teach them those teachings, moral teachings, those communal teachings that your book convey. يعلمه الكتاب والحكمة ويزكيهم. But not just, it doesn't stop here. So he asked for messengers to come to teach and to raise people, to be moral coach for them, to purify them, يزكيهم. A similar concept has been mentioned in chapter Al-Imran, verse 164, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the purpose of the prophethood and why he sent messengers. لَقَدْ مَنَّ اللَّهُ عَلَى الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. It's the grace, the mercy of Allah upon people. إِذْ بَعَثَ فِيهِمْ رَسُولًا مِّنْ أَنفُسِهِمْ. When he sent among people a messenger from them, someone from their own community. رسولا من أنفسهم يتلو عليهم آياته ويزكيهم ويعلمهم الكتاب والحكمة وإن كانوا من قبل لفي ضلال مبين. It's the grace of Allah, the mercy of Allah to send prophets among people to guide them, to recite for them divine instructions, and to purify them, وَيُزَكِّيهِمْ, and to teach them, وَيُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابَ. A very similar concept, very similar verse, we have it in chapter Jum'ah, verse 2. وَالَّذِي بَعَثَ فِي الْأُمِّيِّينَ رَسُولًا مِّنْهُمْ. He is the one who sent among the mass, among the people, lay people, a messenger from them. يَتْلُو عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتِهِ وَيُزَكِّيهِمْ وَيُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةَ. Again, the point is about sending messengers who purify people and teach them the book. What's interesting here, it is my own understanding. I'm not making a claim, but that's something that appeared to me. This how I see there is a connection here. Something interesting is that, so I mentioned 3 verses talking about the same subject, talking about the purpose of the prophethood. And all 3 verses, they talk about 2 main responsibilities. After reciting the words of God to the people, just delivering the message, there are 2 responsibilities: to purify people and to teach people. So a matter of spirituality and a matter of knowledge. But what is interesting is that in the first verse, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala quotes Prophet Ibrahim. Prophet Ibrahim, when he asked for the messengers to come to the people, he first talked about teaching the book, يُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةَ, and then mentions وَيُزَكِّيهِمْ, and purify them. But when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he mentions the purpose of sending the prophets in chapter Al-Imran, verse 164, and chapter Jum'ah, verse 2, he prioritizes yuzakkihim, prioritizes, at least in the verse, he mentions first the purification, yuzakkihim, and then mentions yu'allimuhum, teaching them. وَيُزَكِّيهِمْ وَيُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابِ. Both verses, they have the exact phrase. Which could be, again, it's just my own impression. I don't have a claim. But it could mean that for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the mission of the prophets primarily is the purification. It's the most important one, which goes hand in hand with teaching. So the practical side of religion, the matter of the spiritual perfection, the matter of tarbiyah, the matter of for the prophets to be moral coaches, that's having given priority over just teaching. Teaching comes for the purpose of moral purification. Yes, no moral purification without following the teachings, but the goal is the moral purification. So we have to understand this view, this concept that for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the way that Quran presents, prophets are not merely messengers, they are moral coaches. That's why we see Quran emphasizes on this. In chapter Ahzab, verse 21st, لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. In the Prophet, indeed, there is a perfect example, a prime example for you. The same wording is about Prophet Ibrahim in chapter Mumtahana, verse 4. قَدْ كَانَتْ لَكُمْ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ فِي إِبْرَاهِيمَ وَالَّذِينَ مَعَهُ. It's a prime example for you. Not only in Ibrahim, but also the ones who follow him, true followers of Ibrahim. So it's a matter of following examples, true examples. And both verses mentions similar goal. chapter Ahzab, verse 21 mentions لمن كان يرجو الله واليوم الآخر. Whoever hopes to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, satisfy Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and whoever hopes to reach salvation the day of judgment. The same point mentioned in the verse 6 of chapter Mumtahana. لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِيهِمْ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. The verse 4 mentioned first that Ibrahim and the ones with him are true role models, are prime examples. And then verse 6 explain why they are role example, for which purpose, to what end. لقد كان لكم فيهم أسوة حسنة لمن كان يرجو الله واليوم الآخر. The same justification provided here is for the ones who hope to satisfy Allah, to get closer to Him, the ones who hope to get salvation the day of judgment. So both verses, they emphasize that the way to do so is by following their examples. It's not just by learning, but we have to follow in practice, following role models in practice. And it's also interesting that because of the same wisdom behind Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sending the messengers, it is because of the same wisdom that they ought to be role models, that Allah chooses them from the people, humankind, from the same people, to show people, to show human the extent of the spiritual capacity that we have. Because if another, for example, entity, another creature, like angel, was being sent, his spiritual development could not set an example for us, because we didn't have any way to say we can reach that level or not, because it's not similar to us. But for a human being to reach that level of perfection, that's a prime example that I can do it as well, you can do it as well. This is what Quran explicitly mentions. So in chapter Furqan, Quran mentions the complaints of some of the pagans, some of the infidels who tried to question the message of the Prophet. وقالوا ما لهذا الرسول يأكل الطعام ويمشي في الأسواق لولا أنزل إليه ملك فيكون معه نظيرا. What kind of messenger is he? He's like us. He eats like us. He walks in the mall. He walks in the, for example, in the street like us. So if he is the divine messenger, even if he is a human, at least God could send an angel with him to make him distinguished, to make him special. A similar complaint is mentioned in chapter An'am, verse 8. وَقَالُوا لَوْلَا أُنزِلَ عَلَيْهِمْ مَلَكٌ. Why didn't Allah send an angel to help the Prophet, to show us that he is supported by divinity? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answers in two parts, two justifications, two responses. وَلَوْ أَنزَلْنَا مَلَكًا لَقُضِيَ الْأَمْرُ ثُمَّ لَا يَنظُرُونَ. First of all, if I was going to send someone that they could not deny, they would be forced to accept out of fear of an angel who For example, some of the descriptions in the hadith and narrations is just beyond our imagination. So people would be out of the fear, would be submitted to him. That was not the purpose of. So the whole purpose of creation was to give free will to human being to decide by themselves. And that's why Allah says, if an angel had to come, that was the end, the last day, because there is no anymore the situation, the circumstances for trial, for divine trial on the earth. And then he continues, وَلَوْ جَعَلْنَاهُ مَلَكًا. If we wanted to make the prophet, some of them was asking, why didn't Allah send an angel as his prophet? وَلَوْ جَعَلْنَاهُ مَلَكًا لَجَعَلْنَاهُ رَجُلًا وَلَلَبِسْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ مَا يَلْبِسُونَ. Even if I had to send an angel as a prophet, I was making him look like a human, wearing human clothes, and live among humans. Why? Because of the same purpose. Because the divine messengers, the prophets, were not just messengers, merely messengers. They were supposed to be role models and moral coaches. And to do this mission, they had to be like people, among people, so people can look up to them and learn from them and try to be like them. So what we can conclude from these verses of Quran, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala instructs us to follow the example of the Prophet, to follow the example of Prophet Ibrahim and his true followers, and says, this is the way if you hope to reach to me. And when he talks about the Prophet as role models to guide, it means that one cannot benefit from divine guidance just by learning true beliefs and knowledge and what is right and what is wrong. One needs to follow the examples provided by divinely affirmed, pointed role models to see how those teachings, how those moral teachings of Quran, how those social teachings of Quran can be practiced in life on the practical ground. Let me provide examples. I would claim that we cannot have an appropriate, a true understanding of political Islam, of Islam's view of politics, just by looking at the sources that we have, by just looking at Quran, by just looking at Hadith, without paying particular attention, specific attention to the practical examples set by the Prophet, peace be upon him, by Ali alayhi salam, and by Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam. This is what the verses of Quran teaches us. You cannot just learn by the book. You need to learn it through the practice to see how it is being practiced on the ground. And that, why? Because the book is subject to interpretation. Text is subject to interpretation. And it's needless to say that many people, they manipulated interpretation of divine scriptures for their benefit. Even ISIS was ascribing their horrendous acts, terrifying acts, to the Quran, to the verses of Quran. So to avoid this manipulation, to avoid losing the point, to avoid misunderstanding the divine teaching, we need to reflect, we need to investigate how these teachings were practiced by the role models defined for us. When I'm talking about the lifestyle, about the practical example of said by Ali alayhi salam, by the Prophet, by Imam al-Hassan, I'm not talking about details because for sure the time has changed. The instruments has changed. The community changed. The point is about looking behind their decisions to try to find the wisdom of why they decided or this way or decided to do the other way around. To understand the wisdom behind their decisions, to understand their bigger picture, their viewpoint, their perspective, the morals upon which they decided this way. For example, we can ask ourselves, when we look at the lifestyle of the Prophet, peace be upon him, why did he grant amnesty when he conquered Mecca? He granted amnesty to the people who engaged in a war against him, who deported Muslims from their land, who tortured Muslims, who didn't hesitate to take any opportunity to eliminate Muslims. Why did the Prophet forgive them, gave them amnesty? Why didn't punish them to set an example for the others who wanted to go against him? That's how many rulers they did through the history. To understand the morals behind the Prophet's decision. That's how one can understand the Islamic view of politics, of how to rule a community. When we talk about the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, why did the Prophet Islam accept terms of pagans? Why did he return to Medina without doing Hajj? Even again, understanding the practice of the Prophet through the teaching of Quran, the teaching of Islam, to see how the teachings of Quran are being practiced there. Maybe there are some that we are missing in the way that we try to practice it. If we observe, investigate the life of the Prophet, if we look at the constitution of Medina and the Prophet, peace be upon him, granting protection and acknowledging the right of Jews to practice their own religion, while he himself had a strong claim to make Jews follow him according to their own books, which Quran talks about, that they knew the Prophet better than they knew their own children. They knew, they were informed before, they had the information. Still, they decided to deny. And the Prophet of Islam could make them, for example, in Medina, to follow his call. But why did he grant them the right to practice, to keep practicing Judaism? Or look at the Prophet of Islam, and he vowed protection of St. Catherine Monastery on the Sinai mountain and promised no interference in their local affairs. Why did Prophet do that? What does it teach us? How it goes in line with Quranic teachings? These are the questions we have to ask. We have to try to observe the lifestyle when we are looking at the political Islam, the rule, the approach of the Prophet of Islam, of Ali alayhi salam, when they had the rule, how they treated people, how they treated people from the other faiths. What were the priorities for them? Just looking at Imam Ali alayhi salam's letter to Malik Ashtar, what are the main concerns there for a rule? Look at the Prophet's advice to Mu'adh ibn Jabal when sending him to Yemen. What mattered to Prophet the most in ruling a community? These are what we have to look and study through a practical lens, not just by reading hadith, by looking to how hadith, how Quran is being practiced, is being reflected in the lifestyle of the role models that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala set for us. Why did the Prophet of Islam, for example, accept the consultation of his companions about the Battle of Uhud coming out of the city, while reports saying that the Prophet, he himself, believed that this is the better decision to stay at the Medina? Why did he accept the consultation of his companion, which led to the failure of Battle of Uhud? What it teaches us? وَشَاوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ وَأَمْرُهُمْ شَوْرًا بَيْنَهُمْ, just to see the importance of giving his people an identity, trusting them, and not every time the result would be what we like, but the benefit of trusting them weighs much more. Again, looking at their practice, analyzing it. When we are talking about Ali alayhi salam, the question of why didn't Ali just say, just do a tawriyah, as we call it, so-called tawriyah, after the second caliph passed away? He could just do tawriyah, and when he was asked whether you follow the tradition of the previous caliphs, he could just do a tawriyah and say yes to get the rule. And then if Ali alayhi salam was taking the rule at the time, maybe no Muawiyah was being built later on. Muawiyah became powerful and got his power during the time of Uthman. And all what happened to Ali alayhi salam, to Imam al-Mujtaba, Imam al-Hassan, to Imam al-Husayn, was Muawiyah's doing in a way. So why didn't just he say doing tawriyah and avoid and prevent all these calamities later on? We have to look from the moral lens of Ali. We have to look through the practice of Ali to understand the moral teachings of Quran. When we talk about, for example, again, the political view of Islam, and we see, for example, when Ali alayhi salam took the rule, and many companions, they advised him to get along with Muawiyah, even if it's for a short while, just to make his government is more stable, established, and then deal with Muawiyah. Why he rejected? He didn't let Muawiyah, he didn't give Muawiyah approval to rule even for one single day after his rule. He took the rule. Why is that? Why, for example, he didn't, these are the kind of questions that the answer to them sheds light on very important, fundamental moral teachings of Quran being practiced in the life of Ali, in the life of the Prophet of Islam, when it comes to politics. Why didn't Ali keep happy and satisfied main supporters like Talha and Zubair, because it could prevent the war of Jamal, the Battle of Jamal. And they were the big supporters of Ali since the early Islam, since the passing away of the Prophet. And what was the request? Just to have a bigger share of the public treasury, Bayt al-Mal, or to be given certain positions as a governor or something. They expected Ali to give them that. But Ali, by his morals, he knew that they are not ready for it. They don't deserve it. So some would say, why not just Ali give them something, make them satisfied and happy? You could strengthen his rule. Again, looking at the why Ali did this or didn't do this. This is what I think is necessary. It's a critical point in understanding Islamic perspective. We cannot understand Islam if we isolate our understanding from the way that Islam has been practiced in the life of our role models. It is very important. It is only, we have to get to this point, that it is only after looking at the practice of the Prophet, the practice of Ali, the practice of Imam al-Hassan, that we can see what's wrong with what happens today in the name of Islam in many countries who attribute themselves to Islam. When you see the contrast, the clear contrast with the lifestyle of Ali, the lifestyle of the Prophet, the way what mattered to the Prophet, what mattered to Ali, we don't see them in many rules that they affiliate themselves to Islamic teachings. It's only through the lens of the practice, the practical lens of these role models that we can identify what's going wrong nowadays on the practical ground. The same point that I mentioned about political Islam, the same point can be seen in other domains and other aspects of Islam. When we are talking about the Islamic spirituality, Islamic ethics, social rights and responsibilities, so on and so forth. Again, our focus should not be only limited to text, to Quran, to Hadith. We have to understand Quran and Hadith through the lens of the practice of the confirmed role models. If we want to understand what true submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala means, we have to look for it in the lives of the Prophet and Ahlul Bayt, to see the devotion, to see the extent of submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to see Ali alayhi salam sacrificing his life when he slept on the Prophet's bed, knowing that people are going to kill, most probably going to kill him tonight. We are talking about the example of Husayn alayhi salam, whose submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is echoed through the history since his martyrdom. You see the day of Ashura, the last moment of Husayn ibn Ali, what is recorded from him, the words that he was reciting. إلهي جل بقضائك وتسليما لأمرك ولا معبودا سواك يا غياث المستغيث. It's a word of submission. Oh Allah, I'm your servant, true servant. I have no complaint about anything. I'm submitted to your command. So it is also in the poem ascribed to him, إن كان دين جدي لا يستقيم إلا بقتلي فيا سيوف خضيني. If this is the case that this is the case that Islam, the faith that my grandfather had the mission to advocate, if it is the case that it cannot be fixed unless by me sacrificing myself to wake up these people, oh swords, take me. So he is sacrificing himself. Husayn alayhi salam, his blood is what shakes the whole community. I talked it before in a series of lecture of the impact of the movement of Husayn alayhi salam in both Sunni and Shia school of thought, and how it changed totally the reaction. Until the time of the Imam Hussein movement, you don't see much opposition from the people. They didn't dare. All those kind of movements, most of those kind of movements that they challenge the authority afterward, they were inspired by Hussein's movement in both Sunni and Shia movements. So it was Hussein alayhi salam that planted the seed to reform, to change, to not stand indifferent against injustice. It was the submission of Hussein to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it is this submission that when Zainab alayhi salam talks about what she saw in the day of Ashura, Ma ra'aytu illa jamila, I didn't see but beauty. She doesn't talk about massacre of Ahlul Bayt. She doesn't talk about Imam al-Hussein being killed. She talks about that devotion, that love, that submission she witnessed from Hussein and his companions on the day of Ashura. This is when we talk about submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we have role models, we have to learn from them. Sacrificing everything for the sake of Allah when it is needed. When we talk about devotion, when we talk about love, loving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, having a relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not based on fear, not based on greed, hoping to go to heaven or afraid of going to hell, rather of loving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So looking at the accounts, reports about the life of Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam, it's astonishing just looking at Sahifa Sajjadiyah, the way that Imam talks to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's one of his companions, Tawus al-Yamani, he mentions that one night I was close to Kaaba and I heard someone. I came closer and I saw is Imam al-Sajjad and he is in sajda, prostration. And he repeats some certain words. Tawus said, I listened, and Imam was saying, Ilahi ubayduka bifanaik, miskinuka bifanaik, faqiruka bifanaik. O Lord, is your little servant on your standing in front of your door. Is the poor creature that you have standing in front of your door. Is the one who needs you standing in front of your door. when you look at, for example, Munajat al-Muhibbin, when Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam says, إلهي من ذا الذي ذاق حلاوة محبتك فرام منك بدلا. How beautiful it is. Allah, who is the one who tasted the sweetness of loving you and then is willing to switch it with something else? No one who tasted your love would ever think of changing it, switching it to something else. وَمَنْ ذَا الَّذِي أَنِسَ بِقُرْبِكَ فَابْتَغَى عَنْكَ حِوَلًا. Who is the one who found comfort in getting close to you and seeks to get away from you. يا من أنوار قدسه لأبصار محبيه رائقة وسبحات وجهه لقلوب عارفيه شائقة يا منى قلوب المشتاقين ويا غاية آمال المحبين. Very beautiful phrases. Talks about the love between a servant and his Lord. Talks about the wish and the yearning of a little servant to get closer to his Lord. When we talk about love and devotion, spirituality in Islam, we have to interpret it through the lifestyle, through the devotion, the practical devotion of Imam Sajjad, to understand the depth of spirituality in Shia school of thought. When we are talking about morality, when we are talking about integrity, we are talking about selflessness. We better understand it if we look through the lens of people like Abbas ibn Ali alayhi salam. When Imam Sajjad talks about his uncle, he says, Rahimallah ammi al-Abbas. May Allah grant, bestow mercy and blessing on my uncle Abbas. فلقد آثر وأبلى وفدى أخاه بنفسه حتى قطعت يده. He is the one that endured suffering, pain, encountered difficulties, and sacrificed himself and his two hands to defend his brother. That's the integrity. That's the loyalty. He is the one. We all heard about it, but just to reflect, we are talking about Day of Ashura. We are talking about the heat in the desert of Karbala. When Ali al-Akbar addresses his father, Ya Abat al-Atashu qad qatalani. The thirst is killing me. The heat is killing me. And then Abbas ibn Ali comes to Furat, reaches the water, and the whole his body is crying out for water. But he remembers that his brother and his family are still thirsty there, and his integrity doesn't let him to take water. These are just not the normal moral that we are talking about when we are talking about the morality. These are the peak of morality. These are the noble morals that we see practiced in the lives of our role model. So bringing my discussion tonight to an end, my point, the main point today, my discussion, talking about Islam and spiritual perfection, is about this fact that Islam was never intended to be taught like other subjects, like science, like physics, like mathematics, just in classroom and through the books and texts. Islam was designed to be taught on the practical ground. to be learned through the lifestyle of our role models, like Husayn ibn Ali, like Imam Sajjad, like Abbas ibn Ali. It is through analyzing, reflecting, learning from them that we understand then that what Islamic teaching means in day-to-day life, and what it means to be a Muslim, not on paper, not just having a title, but in practice. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us the blessing to have true insight in understanding the divine teaching, in understanding the lifestyle of our true role models, and to have this insight, proper insight, to interpret the teachings of Quran, the teachings of Hadiths, through the practical examples set for us by the role models which we are celebrating these days, the birth anniversary of three of them, inshallah. Please recite a salawat.